There are a lot of good reasons to get a second passport, but we don't often talk about this extremely simple reason that's been in the news in recent weeks. I'm going to share with you how you could just be stuck if you don't have a second passport. So this is the headline from a website called Courts. UK passport officials are going on strike for 5 weeks. How are you going to get your passport now? The article says the latest strike announcement adds to a wave of labor action in the country not seen since the Thatcher era. And so one of the things that we tell you here is the West still has some benefits. And there's some countries in the West that I think do a better job than others. Ireland and Switzerland are the ones that I've consistently mentioned. I think that they give you a good return, especially if you're a foreigner. But the West in general, US, UK, as much as we may like these countries, as much as we may feel at home there, you're paying more than ever. Politicians are coming out and saying you got to pay even more if you're even modestly successful. Politicians are increasingly talking about canceling your freedoms. Boris Johnson said, hey, you know what? If we don't like what you do, maybe we just won't give you a UK passport to travel with. We're going to literally stop you from traveling. But now you don't have to have politicians do that because as you've seen this wave of labor actions from people in countries across Europe, obviously in France, they're burning the place to the ground recently. The UK's had a number of issues as well. I was invited to go and participate and speak at an event last summer in the UK. And I just said, hey, I'd love to go, but they're canceling like half the flights. I'm not going to deal with that stress. I'm not going to be a guy sleeping on the airport floor. No thanks. And so what they're saying now in the UK is if you need a passport, you're not going to get one. So we've seen this played out not that long ago during the pandemic when the government somehow managed to keep everyone employed. People were working at home or they were doing whatever. They were getting their paycheck. But services were dramatically slowed. Now, I am not the expert on all things government, thank goodness. But it always seemed to me, you have an office that prints passports. You probably don't have that many people. Have them put on a mask and get to work, right? But there's a part of me that feels like there's something more sinister afoot when these countries use, for example, a pandemic to say, oh, we can't print passports. And I've told you numerous times, I had a deal going during the pandemic to sell a piece of property, and the guy buying it, we had to delay for months and months and months and months because when you do international property deals, if you don't have a local passport or a local ID number, you need to have your international passport number on there. And so the deal's not in the US, he's an American, and I'm waiting around for the US passport office to print him a passport. So the most obvious advice is have an active passport at all times. Most countries require 3 or 6 months of validity even after you're supposed to leave the country. So if you go to Europe today and you have 90 days visa-free because you're an American, an Australian, what have you, you should have a passport valid for potentially as much as 6 months. Every country has their own rules. But with a year left of my passport, I'm getting a new passport. And now I might even want to bump that up a little bit. I've gotten new passports after only 3 or 4 years because the thing's full. And in some countries like the United States, you can even go and say, hey, can I have 2 passports from the same country? One might be valid for 10 years, one might be valid for 1, 2, 4 years, and you might fill out a special form. You've got to kind of beg, please give me the privileges, the most basic of privileges of paying you so much money in taxes. But that would be something that I would suggest having, right? Don't wait until your passport's expired. Never go without having a passport because you never know when you want to get out. We've seen in the last couple of years. Hey, if you were living in New York City, don't you think there would have been better places in the world to go in 2020? I can tell you because I did it. I was traveling around the world during the pandemic. Things were certainly there were more precautions in place. But I was able to travel, and I was, relatively free, more so than many people were who were stuck. And many of those folks were stuck because they couldn't get a passport. Now, imagine what else they could do. They're always looking for an emergency, right? It's an emergency. And if you understand how most people work, and the average person buys this hook, line, and sinker. Most people work for the government. They work for a giant corporation. They don't much think for themselves. They're not entrepreneurs. And those of us who are entrepreneurs, those of us who beat to our own drum, we kind of think, as people are wont to do, that everyone else is like us. They're not. right? So when people say, oh, we got to lower taxes. Yeah, most people are against you. Most people want socialism in the West now. Oh, well, we got to have more freedom. Yeah, most people want the government to take care of them and to enforce, more rules these days. And so you think people agree with you, which is why your country is going in the wrong direction, because they don't. And you're just sitting there thinking, well, it doesn't get any better than this. Don't go where you're treated best. No. You need to go where you're treated best because your country is heading in the wrong direction. The people are against you. And whenever the government comes out and says, or a corporation comes out and says, oh, it's an emergency, sorry, can't print passports. That's basically the equivalent of like when you go on, you go to a hotel, for example. Oh, it's for security reasons. What's security? It doesn't even make any sense what you're explaining. It's security. It's for security. They just have their little lines that they recite. They have their micro powers, and you either go along with it or you get kicked out. You have no choice. And that's what happens with your passport. Hey, you don't want to accept our latest emergency? No, obviously the pandemic was an emergency. I don't understand how you can't print people passports so they can get out, unless you don't want them to get out. And so let's talk about what court says. Unionized members of UK's passport offices will go on strike next month after low wages, likely disrupting the delivery of passports during the busy Easter holiday. You pay them a fortune. And when you need them, hey, can I pay you an additional fee to get you to print a little book that I can get people to stamp? We're busy. You consistently pay them. Imagine you paid a business, and there's businesses that I pay, by the way. I keep them on a retainer. I don't use the services sometimes for a year and a half, but then I want to use the services I've been paying for all this time. Imagine if I, turned on my phone service in a certain country after not using it, but I've been paying for it for all that time, and it didn't work. Right? You'd be pretty angry, wouldn't you? But you've been paying taxes your entire life. They tell you it's not enough. In most countries in the West, it's approaching 50%. And then the time when you're like, hey, I'll give you a user fee to do this thing for me that, it's kind of my privilege of citizenship, right? They're like, oh, Easter holidays? Yeah, we don't care. And so now, obviously, after Brexit, you can't just, show up in the EU the same way that you could before. You need to get a passport. And so 100,000 civil servants, including doctors, what could go wrong there? Teachers, what could go wrong there? You saw that happen in Los Angeles recently. The teachers just all went on strike. Who cares if your kids get educated? What do you think you're paying us? Right? What is it? By the way, what is it these politicians always say? In the U.S., they don't talk about doctors because you pay a fortune and you get nothing for your money. In Europe, they talk about doctors and teachers. In the U.S., they talk about teachers and roads and bridges and all that. And what happens? We're just not going to work. Wait a second, I thought that's why you told me I had to pay more taxes, because I'm a jerk if I don't support the doctors and the teachers, and they also add the railway workers, right? Okay, maybe. I thought that's what I was paying more for. Oh, no. You were paying more for whatever, right? By the way, I live in the capital cities everywhere I live, and I always, I walk by the nice hotels. I so often see like diplomatic cars pulling up with a little flag and the diplomatic plates, and the guy's getting out of the car, and someone's, oh, sir, can I open the door for you properly? And he's going to the Ritz-Carlton, there's a cocktail party. I went to, there's a club, I forget where it was, but there was a place I go all the time, like a beautiful club. And I said, we're sorry, we've got a function for the diplomats tonight, right? That's where your money's going. It's not paying for the doctors, the teachers, the rail workers. It's paying for Gavin Newsom in California to go out and guzzle wine at the French Laundry. It's paying for the politicians to get their beaks wet. And they said there's no corruption in the Western world. So it goes on and on and on. We don't have to go through everything. But the Home Office said it was disappointed by the union's decision, strong words, and it would like to manage the impact of the strike action. More than 4,000 passport workers, meaning approximately 1 in 4 employees, will walk out. And so it may not even entirely make sense why they're saying that they can't get you a passport, and yet you're going to have to wait much longer. Approximately 1 million people applied for passports last year during the 5 weeks they're planning on strike, with summer vacations abroad increasing. And so now they're just basically saying, waiting times are going to go up. So you could say, hey, I got to wait a couple extra weeks. Big deal. I'll tell you what, some of my passports, I walk in, I get it renewed in the same day, 4 hours. Here's your passport. And they have a nice smile on their face. It's a delight. Seriously. Done that a couple times in the last 2 years. Go in, fill out a form. Here's your passport. Same day. No screwing around. Why is it the US and the UK can't do what tiny little countries are doing? And I'm not just talking about citizenship by investment countries in the Caribbean, by the way. Those take a little bit longer if you're not going to go there. But the bottom line is, I would not want to be only a citizen of a country where politicians threaten to take my passport. Boris Johnson did it. Justin Trudeau did it. Others have done it. In Australia, they've talked about it. These Western politicians are drunk on power. They keep talking about, you know what, if we don't like, you donated to the truckers. I'm not saying I'm for the truckers or against the truckers. I don't know the truckers. I don't know Putin. But what I do know is you have the right to get a passport. Now, you actually don't have the right to get a passport, but you have the privilege to get a passport. But they keep adding all these different little rules. So you don't even have the right to get one, but okay, generally speaking, you get one, right? No one needs to worry about how, it's a privilege, not a right. But it's increasingly becoming a privilege. And I would not want to be stuck in a country where they want to take more and more of my money, where they want to reduce my freedoms, and not have anywhere else to go. What I'm always telling you is you have a couple residence permits, okay? And then you work towards a second passport. Maybe you get a second passport in a matter of months by investment. Maybe you go through the family tree. If you're British, maybe you have Irish ancestry. Now you got your EU passport back. Maybe you have ancestry from somewhere else. Right? If you're American, lots of different European ancestries and Caribbean and many other countries in the United States. Get your passport by ancestry. Get it by investment. Get it by whatever way works. And then what you do is you switch the residence permits that you have over to the new passport. So let's say that I'm British and I can become Irish through descent, and I'm going to get a residence permit in Malaysia where I can actually go into the hospital, and for a tiny price, I can get the most amazing medical care when the doctors in my country go on strike and actually need medical care. So I'm going to get a residence permit in Malaysia or Thailand, for example, and I'm going to put that in my UK passport. But then when I get the Irish passport, I'm going to flip it. So now I'm not reliant on the UK anymore to travel. Now, obviously, there are some countries like the United States where you're supposed to leave on their passports. If you don't have a valid US passport, they're going to be like, well, you can't leave. So that's why you want to have something going at all times. So the issue for me isn't necessarily that you should make an excuse for letting your passport lapse and just think you can get one whenever you want. Whether it's pandemics, whether it's strikes, whether it's whatever the next emergency is, I would hope we realize by now the government is not there to serve you. They're there to take your money and then go to they're like the guy who goes to the bathroom when the bill comes. If you are British, or from almost any other Western country except for the United States, you can move wherever you want. You can go through the process of becoming tax non-resident. Move to Dubai if you want. Move to Vanuatu. Move to Monaco. Move to a territorial tax country. You can pay as little as zero in tax, both in the UK and in your new destination. All right, now you got a little bit less argument. Although you are still a citizen, you paid taxes for many years, you're paying a user fee for a passport, you still should get the passport. But my point is, why am I putting all my eggs in one basket? Why am I relying on the UK to control my entire freedom of movement throughout the world when we've seen the kind of stuff that's happened just in this century? Wars on terror, pandemics, financial crises, austerity measures, all kinds of things. They'll find any reason they want to keep you in. Now, I wouldn't wait for them to do that. I'm already out. I'm already living my best life in the countries where I'm treated best. But if you haven't done that, at least get started on getting your second passport. Nomad Capitalist helps people do it by descent. If you have an ancestor, parent, grandparent, great-grandparent, we can help you do that just on its own. You don't want to lower your taxes. You don't want bank accounts. You just want that passport. I think you should look at it in the holistic sense. But we help people get passports through their ancestry. We also help people look at all the different issues. I live in a country. I want to move to another country. Here's why I want to move. What are the countries I should move to? What passport should I get? What residence? How do I do everything? How do I handle taxes? How do I bank it? Right. So there's also that for folks who want to take a more bold move. But what I always say is, get something going. Get a second passport, especially if you qualify through your ancestry. That's just no joke. Just had a friend, by the way, who is visiting Europe. A couple years ago, could not visit Europe until they found out they had claim to citizenship by descent, and now they've got a European passport. They can go wherever they want. Their entire life changed with that. And their children's and grandchildren's life will change with a whole new opportunities. So that's just a good thing on its own. And who knows what comes next? Who knows what they might invent next? You want to be ready. It's what Nomad Capitalist does every day.